Remove the bathroom from your home. Take away the ceramic bowl, the sink, the pipes, the sewer connection, and the lock on the door. Then step into a medieval house and ask one simple question.
Where is the privy? Privy? You mean out there? No, inside. A toilet? What's a toilet?
In one home, you may find a wooden seat above a pit in the yard. In another, a pot waits beneath the bed. A wealthy stone residence might contain a narrow chamber inside an outside wall, with waste dropping into a ditch or cesspit. A monastery could have an entire communal latrine block built over running water. So when did medieval homes begin using toilets? The answer depends on what we call a toilet, what we consider a home, and whether monasteries or noble residences count before similar facilities became common among ordinary families.
The chute directs waste outside the castle walls.
What changed was where those systems stood, how much privacy they offered, how waste was collected, and when the facility became part of the building itself. Human need had always existed. Permanent infrastructure came later. Western Europe entered the early medieval period with Roman drains, baths, and public latrines still standing in many places. Some continued operating locally, particularly around the Mediterranean and in the Byzantine world. Others deteriorated as cities contracted, governments changed, and the labor behind large public systems disappeared.
The plan is clear. We require durable stone and constant flow. Let's begin the work.
And enough authority to stop one property owner from sending a private disaster into everybody else's supply. Rome had worked at an imperial scale. Early medieval Europe usually solved problems town by town, estate by estate, and household by household. People still had workable options. A farming family needed no marble public latrine, it needed a regular place, far enough from the door, well, and cooking area to remain manageable. A pit, trench, midden, chamber pot, or simple wooden privy could handle the immediate problem. Space and routine mattered more than architectural sophistication. Space shaped every choice. In a scattered settlement, waste could be buried or moved away from the living area. Inside a crowded town, the neighbor's wall might stand only a few feet from the yard. One family's privy quickly became everybody's concern.
The filth gets worse.
I know! Now the pig's in it!
Towns produced trade, workshops, wealth, and an extraordinary quantity of material that had to go somewhere. This flexibility is easy to miss because archaeology favors stone. A stone chute remains visible for centuries. A wooden shelter behind a cottage may survive only as a dark patch in the soil. Grand toilets photograph well, which can make elite sanitation look far more typical than it really was. The first major move toward a built-in medieval toilet came from buildings large, permanent, and organized enough to justify a dedicated place of necessity. Monasteries were especially suited to this development. Dozens of people slept, prayed, ate, and worked together under one schedule. Sending every monk into the woods whenever nature called would have been a poor sanitation policy for a large religious community.
This sanitation is deplorable!
By the early 9th century, the plan of St. Gall included latrines among the carefully arranged service spaces of an ideal Benedictine monastery. Drawn around the 820s or 830s, the plan describes an intended complex rather than a building known to have been completed exactly as shown. It still proves that purpose-built toilets belonged in serious medieval architectural planning by that date. That gives us one firm answer. Early 9th century designers already treated latrines as a normal part of an organized residential institution. The later monastic version became known as the reredorter, usually positioned near the dormitory. Medieval sources also use the word necessarium, meaning the necessary place. No elegant branding was required. The building simply acknowledged that religious discipline had practical limits. In many houses, rows of seats stood over a channel, drain, or stream. Surviving foundations at places such as Roche Abbey and Fountains Abbey show latrine blocks placed above watercourses. Monks could sometimes reach them directly from the dormitory without descending to ground level. Screens and partitions offered increasing privacy in later arrangements. These facilities did not flush like modern toilets. Water moved under the seats because the structure had been placed over a natural stream or an engineered drain. Gravity handled most of the work, and gravity rarely missed a shift. Monastic latrines reveal the ingredients needed for a permanent system: planned construction, a stable population, disposal channels, and collective maintenance. Monasteries brought those conditions together earlier than most ordinary households. Builders also had to choose the site carefully. Wastewater needed to leave the community without flowing toward wells, kitchens, or washing places. Some systems became remarkably sophisticated, though geography always set the limits. A monastery beside a dependable stream had options unavailable to a dry settlement on a hill. Engineering began with the land itself. The evidence becomes much thinner once we leave large stone institutions. Wooden toilets often disappear completely. Pits are filled, reused, or destroyed by later construction. Broken chamber pots can resemble ordinary ceramic fragments. Written records favor monasteries, castles, governments, and property disputes. They rarely preserve the morning when an unknown family built a small privy behind a timber house. The oldest surviving example, therefore, cannot automatically be called the first one used. Archaeology usually gives us a minimum date. The practice already existed by that point. It does not preserve the Tuesday morning when somebody first tried it. Sometimes the waste itself supplies the strongest evidence. Cesspits preserve seeds, animal bones, parasite eggs, scraps of leather, broken pottery, and objects dropped by accident. From those remains, archaeologists reconstruct diet, disease, trade, and household possessions. A cesspit is an archive created by people who had no intention of helping historians. One pit might serve several purposes over time. A family could dig it for waste, clean it, stop using it, and later fill it with rubbish or construction debris. Researchers therefore examine soil layers, insects, parasites, plant remains, and the structure's shape together. One unpleasant sample can answer questions untouched by the most beautiful manuscript. The castle guardrobe remains the medieval toilet most people recognize. A narrow chamber, a wooden or stone seat, a round hole, and a chute descending through the wall. It resembles a modern bathroom after every pleasant feature has been removed. Guardrobes became common in castles and fortified residences from the 11th and 12th centuries onward. Some emptied down the outside wall, others discharged into pits, ditches, moats, or collection chambers. Large households could have several facilities serving different rooms and social ranks. Orford Castle, built for Henry II in the later 12th century, contained several guardrobes and even a built-in urinal connected to the constable's chamber. The design recognized that a senior official might prefer not to cross an entire fortress during the night. Around the year 1200, Penhallam Manor in Cornwall gained a guardrobe chamber whose drainage channel ran toward the moat. Penhallam was a substantial residence rather than an enormous royal palace. By then, a purpose-built toilet had entered the design of a wealthy domestic complex. Most guardrobes had no running water at the seat. A wooden bench and cover might sit above the opening. Chutes collected material, pits filled, and projecting chambers became bitterly cold in winter. Privacy followed status. A lord could have a private guardrobe near the bedchamber, while servants and soldiers used shared facilities elsewhere. Several castle toilets represented advanced planning without producing an ensuite bathroom for every resident. The word guardrobe also referred to rooms associated with clothing, which helped create the popular claim that people hung garments near toilets because the odor repelled moths. Evidence for that convenient explanation remains weak. Medieval rooms and words often had overlapping uses, and uncertainty should not be promoted into universal custom. The architecture does show something useful. By the 12th century, wealthy Western European homes could contain permanent toilets. Stone walls, upper floors, and vertical shafts allowed waste to leave the occupied chamber without somebody carrying a full pot down the stairs. That convenience changed household labor rather than eliminating it. A chamber pot had to pass through rooms and corridors. A chute sent the waste outside immediately, though only as far as the base of the wall. Somebody still had to deal with what collected there. One person walked less, and another person gained a job. This counted as progress even though access remained selective. The familiar European sequence often runs from Roman sewers to monastic drains and then to castle garderobes. The wider medieval world followed several different paths. Byzantine communities adapted older facilities. In Islamic cities, water management, traditions of washing, dense housing, and inherited construction practices produced other arrangements. Archaeological work in Al-Andalus has identified latrines and drains built inside homes during periods when integrated domestic sanitation remained uncommon across much of Christian Northern Europe. Islamic households did not all possess modern plumbing. Systems differed according to wealth, city, and water supply. Some latrines emptied into cesspits or blind wells. Others connected to drains. Water used for washing did not necessarily create a modern flushing system. Even so, an urban family in Al-Andalus could have domestic sanitation that looked strikingly sophisticated to visitors from farther north. Religion alone cannot explain the difference. Local law, water supply, construction traditions, inherited urban fabric, and household wealth all mattered. Sanitation followed networks of knowledge and resources. A method could be common in one city and nearly absent a few hundred miles away. The question has now changed. Medieval communities already knew many ways to build toilets. The real issue is why some integrated them into houses while others kept them outside. Density supplied one of the strongest pressures. Rural households had land. Monasteries had organization. Castles had thick walls and money. Towns had a growing problem. As urban populations expanded from roughly the 11th century onward, backyards filled with wells, animals, workshops, rubbish pits, and privies. A common household toilet was a small structure over a cesspit, sometimes lined with timber or stone. Liquid seeped into the surrounding ground, while solid material accumulated. Eventually, somebody had to remove it. Imagine a merchant family living on a narrow urban plot. The shop faces the street, with family rooms above or behind it. The yard contains storage, a well, perhaps a few animals, and the privy. Every new structure competes for the same small area. Put the cesspit in the wrong place and it could foul the water, damage the neighbor's property, or make the rear room almost uninhabitable. Sanitation became architecture under pressure. A door over the seat did nothing to make the waste disappear. Workers, later known as gong farmers, emptied cesspits and transported the contents away. Town rules sometimes limited the hours when they could move it through the streets. Imagine municipal waste collection using barrels and a vehicle nobody wished to follow. Privies also generated lawsuits. A pit beside a boundary could seep through the soil, rot timber, pollute a well, or produce a smell powerful enough to bring neighbors into court. London regulations address the location of privies and cesspits. Complaints record failure while also showing attempts at control. Officials understood that private sanitation created public consequences. This gives us a more accurate picture of medieval streets. Residents complained, sued, hired laborers, cleared channels, passed regulations, and tried to protect drinking water. Their methods had serious limits, and enforcement was inconsistent. Nobody enjoyed discovering that the neighbor's cesspit had entered the cellar. For many households, the most practical indoor device remained the chamber pot. It provided privacy during illness, bad weather, and darkness. Pots sat beneath beds, in corners, or inside a closed stool, a box or chair holding a removable vessel. A chamber pot created no permanent toilet room. Somebody had to empty it. Modern bathrooms combine the seat, clean water, disposal, washing, ventilation, and privacy inside one room. Medieval homes often divided those functions. The act happened in one place, disposal somewhere else, and washing in another. This divided system explains why the question, "Did the house have a toilet?" can produce opposite answers. A family might own a private and regularly used device while lacking a special room or drain. Medieval household standards could treat that arrangement as complete. A modern property listing would advertise 0 bathrooms. A dedicated chamber also required space. Poor households might cook, sleep, work, and store goods inside 1 or 2 rooms. Constructing a separate toilet made sense only when the building and budget could support it. During the later Middle Ages, wealthier townhouses increasingly included permanent features. Multi-story buildings used chutes leading to cesspits. Manor houses added garderobe wings. Merchant properties enclosed yard privies. Several crowded households might share one facility. Toilets were entering urban planning without becoming universal. A nun, peasant, merchant, and noble living in the same century could use 4 entirely different systems. Public latrines followed the same uneven pattern. London had communal facilities during the High Middle Ages. In 1421, the Longhouse associated with Richard Whittington opened with extended rows of seats for men and women. It functioned as infrastructure for a crowded commercial city rather than as anything resembling a private bathroom. Descriptions give the Longhouse 64 seats for men and 64 for women. The structure stood over a channel connected to the Thames, using the river as its final carrier. The system worked efficiently from the narrow perspective of the person sitting above it, and rather less impressively for everybody relying on the same water downstream. The Longhouse showed that London's waste problem had grown beyond what individual households could manage alone. Government, charity, landowners, and laborers were becoming part of one large and unpleasant system. By the 14th and 15th centuries, latrines and cesspits appear constantly in archaeology, regulations, and legal disputes across Europe. Some pits were carefully lined. Others were crude holes. One could serve a single household or several properties. Some emptied into waterways, offering great convenience upstream and misery farther down. Their contents now provide a direct record of daily life. Parasite eggs show intestinal disease. Plant remains reveal food. Coins, pins, combs, and pottery preserve accidents. Toilets kept evidence that no official chronicle considered worthy of attention. The contents can also expose social differences and trade connections. Imported fruit, unusual foods, and costly ceramics may belong to a prosperous household. A humbler pit can reveal repetitive local meals and improvised repairs. The toilet strips away dignity while preserving inequality in remarkable detail. Kings commissioned chronicles. Ordinary households left fruit stones. Privacy changed along with the technology. Monastic latrines gained screens. Elite chambers placed guardrobes near bedrooms. Urban privies acquired doors and walls. Medieval communities sometimes accepted levels of communal exposure that would make modern users uncomfortable. Yet buildings increasingly separated household members, visitors, ranks, and bodies. A toilet could communicate status. A private seat beside a chamber saved time and embarrassment. Several facilities signaled a large residence. A chute that prevented pots from crossing the hall offered real comfort. Luxury often begins when an unpleasant task becomes somebody else's responsibility. Every system still depended on maintenance. Seats wore out, drains blocked, material built up inside chutes, pits filled. Servants and hired workers cleaned what the architecture placed out of sight. Medieval sanitation existed because people kept working on it. The late medieval transformation involved normalization across a wider range of buildings. Monasteries had treated latrines as communal infrastructure centuries earlier. Castles integrated garderobes. Townhouses used shared or private cesspit privies. Authorities regulated placement and built public facilities. Rural households changed more slowly because their pressures were different. A detached privy, pit, or chamber pot remained practical when land surrounded the house. An expensive stone shaft added little to a modest timber building. The absence of a built-in toilet reveals the form of the system rather than the absence of one. The countryside also allowed temporary and seasonal practices. Farm laborers, travelers, and people living in light structures did not always use permanent privies. Weather, household size, work, and available land changed the routine. Medieval domestic sanitation often existed as a habit rather than a room. None of these arrangements should be mistaken for a modern flushing toilet. Modern bathrooms depend on clean water, sealed pipes, traps blocking sewer gases, ceramic fixtures, sewers or septic tanks, pumps, and treatment systems. Medieval builders handled drains and flowing water skillfully in monasteries, palaces, and many Islamic cities. They did not provide every household with a sealed system that removed waste on demand. A medieval toilet usually formed a controlled opening between the user and a collection point, above a pit, through a wall, over a stream, or down a chute. Good design depended on putting that opening in the least troublesome place available. Even when water carried the waste away, no treatment plant waited downstream. Removing it from the immediate building counted as success. What happened afterward depended on rivers, soil, channels, workers, rainfall, and luck. Modern sanitation asks where the material eventually ends up. Medieval systems often stopped asking once it had left the room. So when did medieval homes first use toilets? Any designated container or place for relieving the body qualifies, and medieval households used those throughout the entire period. Pits, chamber pots, and outdoor privies needed no late medieval invention. Their origins reach far earlier. Built-in residential toilets followed a more visible sequence. The plan of St. Gall shows dedicated latrines in monastic design by the early 9th century. Religious sites preserve sophisticated systems from the 11th and 12th centuries. Castles and wealthy houses increasingly incorporated garderobes during the same period, with clear domestic examples around 1200. Among ordinary urban families, cesspit privies became increasingly visible as towns expanded in the 12th and 13th centuries. They appear abundantly in later medieval archaeology and regulations. Many remained in yards or were shared between properties. Rural households commonly depended on detached structures and portable pots through the end of the period. The most honest date is therefore a sequence: early medieval planning inside major institutions, high medieval adoption among elites, and broader urban normalization from roughly the 12th century onward. That sequence explains why different histories offer different first dates. One writer selects the 9th century monastery plan. Another focuses on a 12th century castle garderobe. A third looks at later townhouses. Each may be answering a different version of the same question. Return to the house where we began. Porcelain, running water, and hidden pipes have disappeared. The family still knows what to do. A chamber pot waits beside the bed. A wooden privy stands in the yard. The stone house next door contains a garderobe inside its wall. Beyond the town, monastery latrines sit above moving water. Each belongs to a different building, landscape, budget, and community. The first medieval toilet is difficult to date because nobody needed to invent a hole beneath a seat. The achievement lay in fitting sanitation into houses, monasteries, castles, laws, labor systems, and increasingly crowded streets. Modern bathrooms conceal all of that behind tile, pipes, and a closed door. Medieval toilets revealed far more of the chain. They still solved the same daily problem: one pit, wooden seat, and necessary room at a time.